doing another one of these things. Today, the highlight is going to be the Happy Lesson OVA. I got a sealed copy here on eBay, extremely cheap for $1, and I paid a couple dollars for shipping. But it's not every day that I get to unpack, unwrap an anime DVD from the early 2000s that's still factory sealed. There's a surprising amount of them that are available out there just floating around on eBay. Not necessarily for like the most popular series, but occasionally with like more obscure stuff, sometimes OVAs, sometimes single volumes of shows that have later been re-released on Blu-ray. You'll see floating sealed copies on there for not that much money, and I think that was really neat. So I'm going to take a look at this one, but maybe provide a little bit of backstory since I think it's kind of interesting here. So Happy Lesson was originally a story published in the Dengeki magazine. And it wasn't just any type of story, it was a reader participation game turned into a narrative, and it became some sort of media mix property. Dengeki had experimented with this prior with the franchise Sister Princess or Sispuri, which was another reader participation game released in a magazine a couple years prior. I think like late 90s or like year 2000 kind of era, whereas this was like 2000, 2001-ish. But Sispuri was extremely popular, so they decided to do something similar, except more directed towards a different type of demographic, whereas Sispuri was more for like otaku into Imoto characters. This one's a little bit more into like otaku into like older women that are into MILFs, stuff like that. I wasn't able to find too much information. Granted, I didn't like dig too deep into it, but I couldn't really find too many details about the specifics of what the reader participation game actually was. Although I can imagine it mainly was probably like popularity polls, just kind of determining which characters would be featured and what the protagonist would do. Like, let's say so-and-so character was the most popular in last month's poll, and in the following month, the character will be featured or something. They go on a date, something like that. I don't know. But regardless, the show was popular enough that it received not only an OVA but also a television show as part of the media mix. For those that don't know, a media mix, just put simply, is like it's sort of like it's a multimedia project that will be developed for the purpose of like cross marketing itself, I guess. So, for example, it will be something like, for example, Fate is a good example. Not necessarily like intended to be a media mix, but it ended up becoming one since there's anime, there's games, there's a lot of merchandise, there's books, manga. So like if you're into Fate, then there's a lot of things that you can branch out and get into, but at the same time, like let's say you only play video games or something, or you only read light novels, you could still interact with that series, and you might end up branching off and trying different other aspects within that media property, and then the publisher, it benefits them because of that. But this was much more popular in the late 90s, early 2000s, just by virtue of it being more of a new thing, but also just because that's kind of where the otaku culture and the otaku buying habits were at the time, because it was primarily still focusing on like physical media, collecting physical media, physical games, getting special editions of stuff that would come with like limited drama CDs and whatnot. Happy Lesson existed within that. Dengeki capitalized on that popularity, and it seemed like they did have a decent amount of success with this particular series. So, Happy Lesson, it's actually an interesting story here, because the OVA was what came out initially, like I think I alluded to a little bit previously. This was a 5-episode OVA that began airing in 2001, which each individual episode didn't necessarily come out like every week like a typical television anime would. It was divided between whatever a period of time those 5 episodes came out. The interesting thing though is that around at the same time the TV series was airing, and they're similar but different enough that you kind of get a different experience with both shows. That they have same characters, similar plot lines, similar type of show that you're watching, but they're just different enough that it kind of can be interesting if you're into that kind of thing. But due to Happy Lesson kind of being a fairly unremarkable anime, I didn't really catch a lot of those things. I just kind of watched it, and plus I watched Happy Lesson TV like 3 years ago, and then I watched Happy Lesson OVA like a month ago, so that time gap kind of was like, oh, I kind of remember a little bit of that, but it was a fairly fresh experience for me, but I wouldn't recommend watching them back to back because you're essentially getting the same thing. The OVA does have a slightly different tone, if I remember correctly, but overall not too dissimilar. The interesting thing though is that these were coming out at the same time because they overlapped due to the airing. Because like I mentioned, the OVA started coming out in 2001, but it didn't finish releasing the OVA itself, all the episodes, until 2003, whereas the television anime came out in 2002, and it was only one course, so it finished within a couple months. So these were at one point releasing concurrently with each other, which perhaps might have confused some people just because one of them is called Happy Lesson OVA and the one's just called Happy Lesson. But regardless, right here I have the Happy Lesson television anime. This is the box set from ADV right here. Specifically, it's called the Teacher's Pet Collection. I find this really interesting right here because, you get the entire series right here. This one contains episodes 1 through 6. Volume 2 contains episodes 7 through 12. And then the final volume is the curious one because it contains episodes 13, 14, and then right here, OVA 1, 2, and 3. The interesting thing about this particular series, at least when it was licensed in North America by ADV, is that they didn't get the entirety of the OVA because the OVA wasn't finished at the time. So they only got 3 episodes of it. So some people might watch the Happy Lesson Teacher's Pet Collection. They have it on DVD. They watch the 3 OVA and think that's all there is. But this 3rd episode kind of ends on a weird cliffhanger, alluding to that there's more of the story. So I think it was a kind of a strange decision to release this in such a format that it would be incomplete. Especially since ADV would eventually later release the OVA right here, which contains... Actually, it doesn't contain the rest of them right here. It contains only the same 3 episodes. That's kind of what I thought, that this one didn't have everything either, so these technically are the same. This is the complete box that you would typically get, whereas this one only contains the last 3, which is kind of a shame. I just got it for collection purposes. I'm not losing much for $1, but it is just kind of interesting that you'd be missing the last 2 episodes of the OVA regardless, since it was never picked up after the fact, as far as I'm aware, because later ADV kind of morphed into Sentai Filmworks, and I'm fairly certain they never released this show after that. This was the only release of it, and it's not the entirety of it, because Happy Lesson would later go on to have a couple more OVAs. I think another television show called Happy Lesson Advance, and then a final OVA, but I've never gotten around to finishing those, so I can't really comment too much on that. But it is just kind of an interesting release, just due to the nature of like how things were being handled within Japan and how the American market was. But let's just get cracking. Let's get this thing open up right here. This thing hasn't been opened since, like, I don't know, 2005 or whatever. So I just generic shrink wrap. So I got the disc here. I also pulled off my shelf a DVD copy of Puni Puni Poemi, which is also by ADV. I pulled this one off my shelf specifically because they both have this clear style packaging, and I just want to kind of compare the two because they're both OVA for a series that is Excel Saga is obviously significantly more popular, especially at the time in the 2000s. But I'm just curious to see, because Puni Puni Poemi did come with a couple of extras. It came with this little poster right here, as well as a patch that says Poemi, alongside the DVD and a reversible cover. So I kind of wanted to compare and contrast to see, like, how much effort they put into the Puni Puni Poemi versus a Happy Lesson OVA, which I'm not really expecting too much, but first I need to take care of this really annoying DVD security seal thing. It's always the last little piece that stays on and I can't get off. Alright, finally got it off. There's a proper way to do it. Like, you're supposed to pull like the little tab right here and it will kind of come off, but it didn't really work out for me. It broke immediately. But I digress. Let's open this up and check out what's inside. I just gotta say though, I really like these clear cases. They're pretty neat. So inside right here I can see a couple of things. The first is a reversible cover. The second is the disc, and then the last thing is it's got a little insert right here, which I'm not sure if it's an actual poster, but we do get some nice art here from the television series. Here's a larger poster, and then on the inside is another poster. We got some beach episode stuff right there, which is really nice. Even though it's small, it's just key art. I really appreciate when distributors, at least especially back in the day, they definitely don't do that now. They would just go through the effort, like just print that, people will like it. Right here we got some nice character designs from character designer Sasaki Mutsumi, who is a character designer for not only Happy Lesson, but Myself, Yourself, Chaos Head, and The Memories of My Beloved. I really like the character designs right here. Something about the eyes and the hair right here, especially like how the hair is like, it's big but it's kind of flowy. It's very of the era and I love it. Another thing that's really cool that DVDs don't do anymore, it's got these reversible covers. This is not like a real reversible cover per se, but you can reverse it if you want. The only reason I say it's not a real one is because it doesn't have any of the, like the DVD junk here, but you can definitely flip it over and then you can see a different character on the other side, which I'm going to do right now just for demonstration purposes. The Puni Puni Poami one had that as well. And then another curious release is Kore wa Watashi no Goshujin-sama, which was released by Sentai Filmworks. I can't remember if this is not going to close. It's just kind of, because this thing is like really, okay, there we go. So here's the case. This one's upside down. So you technically could flip it and you can have it the other way. But I was mentioning Kore wa Watashi no Goshujin-sama, which was released by Sentai Filmworks, not ADV. They kind of became the same company, if I remember correctly, because Sentai Filmworks acquired a lot of the properties owned by ADV, later re-released a handful of them, and I believe they shared some staff, or at the very least, they were in very close proximity to each other, so people might have gone over, because they're both based out of Texas in the United States. But with Kore wa Watashi no Goshujin-sama, it's also another one of these clear DVD case type of deals, and it comes with a reversible cover as well as an art card, I want to say, and I have a copy of it, and I just find it curious because Sentai Filmworks didn't really do that afterwards. Sentai Filmworks are kind of like the bargain bin anime DVD releasers these days, because like if you get a standard Blu-ray from them, it's just going to be like a generic blue Blu-ray case with a couple of discs in there, and then that's it. Like, you get absolutely nothing. You're just getting the series. Sometimes they put out steelbooks these days, but I don't care about steelbooks, so I never buy them. For a period, though, they did do these like clear ones, and then they did a couple of pretty solid special editions. But this one right here for, just a OVA that's very niche, they did do a good job putting together a little thing. Like, I would be happy to purchase this back in, whenever they put it out in like 2004 or whatever. Another curious thing, this right here, it's not like a right angle right here. It's slightly curved, and it's also the same on the other side, which is a cool stylistic choice. And now that I look at it, Puni Puni Poami also does the same thing. I'm not sure if this was something ADV was doing at the time, but it's pretty sweet. It's just the little things like that. As a media collector, I appreciate all of it. But I think that about wraps up my rambling discussion about Happy Lesson, the OVA DVD that I purchased for $1. It's definitely a mediocre show. I'm not going to try to sugarcoat it, I guess. the OVA started pretty good. The first 3 episodes were enjoyable. The last three, very much of the era, they kind of go a little too absurd, and it lost me. It almost had me there. It almost had me in the first 3 episodes, and then the last two lost me, and which was a shame because the OVA was shaping out to be a little bit more interesting than this one. It's just that the main character, he is kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say problematic. He's just a little too much to handle sometimes, I think. He's a little too absurd for his own good, and I think they pushed that to the limit of my suspension of disbelief, I suppose. Just because it's like, within anime, characters will deform, characters will have funny faces. This guy just becomes a cartoon character. I'm not watching a cartoon, I'm watching an anime harem show from the 2000s. I just want to watch harem antics. I don't necessarily need like the craziest, absurdist. I'm not watching an Imaishi show. I'm not watching Abenobashi. I didn't like Abenobashi for a reason, and I'm watching anime for another specific reason, and this is not that. So, Happy Lesson, superficially, it's comfy. I like the character designs, but once you kind of get into the groove of it, and the comedy starts to push its, it starts to press my buttons in the wrong way, and I end up not really liking it as much as I probably would have if that were not there. But ultimately, I think that's what made the show popular within Japan. I remember reading something about how the comedy was a big draw for a lot of people. Maybe I might be remembering it from another show, which is, I guess, a kind of a stark contrast from Sispuri, which played itself fairly straight, at least in terms of the anime. Small little absurd things here and there, but overall pretty solid. Between the two, I'm more of a Sispuri guy. But regardless, that's enough rambling for me. That's Happy Lesson. Definitely go check it out if you're interested in like the aesthetics. Like if this looks comfy to you, check it out. Don't expect too much. But I guess that's about it. Thanks for watching me ramble once again about a random thing I bought from eBay.